Deep within a forgotten kingdom, a single whisper could shatter an age of silence. A young elf named Lyra stands before the ancient heartwood of the great elder tree, a place where no voice has been heard for centuries. Her beloved mentor is fading, and the old ways offer no cure, only fearful quiet. Desperation guides her hand as she leans close and breaks the most sacred rule of her people, pleading for help directly into the tree's core. This act of defiance is forbidden for a grave reason. Ever since the Great Blight twisted the woods and forced the elves into isolation. By speaking, Lyra risks awakening the slumbering forest guardians, whose wrath is legendary, and she invites the scorn of her entire community. Her deeply personal quest to save one life now challenges the foundations of her world. By the end of this journey, you will understand how one brave voice can reignite the magic of an entire civilization and heal a broken world. We will uncover what truly caused the Great Blight and discover the fate of the legendary guardians she hopes to awaken. Wherever you are listening from, and whatever the local time is for you right now, I hope you are settled in comfortably. What does it take for a single act of hope to overcome generations of fear? The council's chamber was a circle of ancient, silent stone. Lyra stood in its center, her small figure dwarfed by the towering forms of the elders. Elder Boren's voice was like winter frost, not loud, but chilling everything it touched. He spoke of order, of the safety found in silence, of the generations who had chosen isolation over the peril of the unknown. To speak to the trees was to invite chaos. To challenge the decree was to challenge the very foundation of their survival. Lyra's own voice felt fragile in response, a single note against a wall of history. She did not plead for forgiveness. Instead, she argued that their strength was fading, that the very silence they cherished was a slow, quiet end. The old ways were a shield, she conceded, but a shield that had begun to rust, trapping them inside a fortress of their own fear. The council's judgment was swift and absolute. Exile. She was to be cast out from the Silverwood Glade, her home, until she could prove the gentle myths of their ancestors were more than just cautionary tales. It was a punishment designed to force her to recant, a test no one was expected to pass. For a moment, the weight of her duty to the community pressed down, a suffocating blanket of expectation. But then she thought of her fading mentor and of the desperate, hopeful whisper she had already sent into the world. Her conviction solidified, a quiet, unshakable core within her. She would accept their exile. She would embrace it. Her path was no longer within the glade, but beyond it, in the deepest, most forbidden parts of the Whispering Forest, where the legendary myth spinners were said to dwell. By choosing this, she became an outcast, her name spoken with a mix of pity and scorn, and as if the forest itself echoed the council's disapproval, the air grew colder. The familiar, comforting rustle of leaves began to sound like a low growl, a resonant warning to any who dared listen too closely. With nothing but her resolve and the memory of a single, whispered plea, Lyra stepped across the threshold, marked by the glimmering boundary stones. Behind her lay the only home she had ever known. Ahead, the path vanished into a swirling mist, through which only the faint, haunting echoes of a forgotten song seemed to guide the way. The forest floor was a trap of writhing thorns. Lyra froze, her breath catching as the vines twisted upward, their barbs glinting with a faint, malevolent light. This was not the gentle rustle of the Silverwood. This was the forest's defensive rage, a living wall of pain designed to repel intruders. Panic clawed at her throat, a cold echo of the council's warnings. But beneath that fear, a memory surfaced, a soft melody her mentor had hummed during a long-ago storm. It was a fragment of a gentle myth, a story song about a thorny guardian who had forgotten its purpose was to protect, not to harm. Her voice was a trembling thread at first, barely audible over the vine's hissing rattle. She hummed the old lullaby, pouring into it all her desperation, her hope, and her apology for the intrusion. The change was not instantaneous. The vines slowed their thrashing, their sharp points hesitating mid-air, as if listening to a language they had not heard in centuries. Then they began to uncoil, retreating into the soil with a soft, rustling sigh. Where they had been, a path of soft, glowing moss was revealed, pulsing with a gentle, green light. From within the retreating thicket, a single luminous moth emerged, its wings like chips of moonlight. It circled her head once, then drifted toward the new path. A part of her mind, the part shaped by a lifetime of caution, whispered that this was merely luck, a fortunate coincidence in a forest of random dangers. But a deeper, more instinctual part recognized this as an answer. The forest was not just a place of threats. It was a place of memory, and it had responded to a memory she had offered. She made a choice in that moment, a decision that felt as significant as her initial whisper to the heartwood. She would trust the guidance. She would follow the moth and the glowing path, accepting that the old ways were not just rules to be broken, but truths to be rediscovered. This small success was a spark in the overwhelming dark, a validation that fueled her resolve. Yet, as the moth led her onward, the air grew still and watchful. From the deep shadows between the ancient trees, a different kind of silence began to gather, a presence that felt old and cold, a thing that despised the reawakening of song. The luminous guide drifted toward the distant sound of flowing water, a hidden stream whose melody carried the very memories of creation. The water was not merely cold, it was alive. As Lyra knelt and cupped her hands to drink from the stream of echoes, the first drop touched her lips and the world dissolved. It was not a single memory, but 1,000 lifetimes flooding her mind at once. A roaring symphony of joy, sorrow, love, and loss that was not her own. She felt the weight of ancient coronations and the quiet ache of personal farewells, the thrill of discovery and the sting of conflict. Her own thoughts, her own name, began to fray at the edges, pulled apart by the relentless current of the past. This was the true test the forest presented, not of physical strength, but of spiritual endurance. To drink was to risk being washed away forever, becoming just another faint echo in the stream. She fought to find an anchor, a single point of focus in the chaos, and then she saw it. A being of pure, woven light, the first myth spinner, stood at the dawn of time. Its form was not solid, but a tapestry of melody and intention. With hands that moved like a gentle breeze, it did not command the world, but invited it into harmony. Where its light fell, a sapling straightened toward the sun. A discordant wind softened into a carrying tune. It was an act of profound collaboration, a reminder that the world was not a thing to be controlled, but a partner to be sung with. From this vision, A single, resonant phrase emerged in her mind, a key refrain from the long-lost myth of renewal. The words were not in any language she knew, yet their meaning was clear, a fundamental promise of healing and return. Clutching this phrase, this newfound piece of the old song, she made a conscious, agonizing choice. She pulled her awareness back from the torrent, sealing the memory of the myth spinner and its song within the core of her being. The echoes receded, leaving her gasping on the stream bank, fundamentally changed. She now carried a living piece of the magic her people had forsaken. This knowledge was her greatest hope, but it also made her a beacon. The same silence that had fallen over the forest would now sense this rekindled light, and whatever had enforced that quiet for so long would be watching. Heart still pounding with the residual energy of 1,000 souls, Lyra rose. The haunting melody of the stream was clearer now, no longer just a sound, but a guide. With the myth's phrase humming in her blood, she turned and began to follow the water's flow backward, toward its hidden source, drawn by the origin of the song itself. The grove was a garden of stone. Towering forms, frozen in mid-reach, stood silhouetted against the bruised twilight sky. These were the slumbering giants, ancient sentient trees locked in a magical stillness so deep that no moss grew upon their bark and no sound echoed in the space between them. Lyra moved among them, a flicker of life in a realm of suspended time. The phrase from the stream of echoes hummed within her, a fragile warmth against the profound cold of their enchantment. She approached the most ancient of them all, a willow whose branches swept the ground like a curtain of gray thread. Placing her hands upon its bark, she closed her eyes and did not command or plead. Instead, she poured the melody outward, offering it like a shared memory, a gift of the harmony they had once known. The effort was immense. It felt as though the song was being drawn from her very spirit, leaving a hollow, aching fatigue in its wake. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, a faint, golden light pulsed deep within the willow's core. A tremor ran through its massive trunk, and with a sound like distant thunder, one of its great branches slowly, creakingly, began to rise. Leaves that had been gray and brittle for centuries shimmered into a soft, silver-green luminescence. The giant was awakening. Its consciousness, vast and slow, touched hers for a single, breathtaking instant, imparting not words, but a clear, directional intent. The creaking branch pointed unmistakably toward a distant mountain pass, a jagged cut in the peaks that was already being swallowed by churning, dark storm clouds. But the grove was not unguarded. From the deep shadows at the edge of the clearing, formless shapes began to coalesce. The watchers, they had no eyes, yet she felt their attention fix upon her, a pressure that was cold and deeply hostile. They were the enforcers of the silence, drawn by the ripple of magic she had just created. Their presence was a corruption, a void that sought to extinguish the light she had rekindled. She stood at a crossroads, her body trembling with exhaustion, the safe path back into the forest now closed off by these shifting shades. To follow the willow's guidance meant heading directly into a gathering storm, pursued by a visible and growing threat. Her decision was made in a single, sharp breath. She could not turn back. The awakened light in the willow's leaves was a truth her people needed to see, a proof that the gentle myths were more than stories. If the path led into a storm, then that was the path she would take. Pushing through the deep weariness, she turned her back on the grove and the advancing watchers, and began to run toward the mountains. As she reached the edge of the tree line, leaving the stone garden behind, the first cold drops of the mountain storm stung her skin, a bitter promise of the trials ahead. The storm lashed at the mountain pass with a fury that felt personal. Lyra's steps were heavy, each one a battle against the wind and the deep weariness that clung to her spirit. It was in the relative shelter of a shallow cave, behind a curtain of freezing rain, that she first heard it. Not the howl of the gale, but a low, resonant hum, a sound so full of sorrow it made the air itself feel heavy. There, curled against the rock, was a being woven from what looked like shimmering, petrified amber. It was the shepherd of lost songs, and its long, graceful fingers were carefully gathering faint, flickering motes of light from the air, placing them into a worn satchel with an air of infinite sadness. Each mote was a fragment of a forgotten story, a melody on the verge of fading into silence forever. One of the fragments, a larger piece than the others, pulsed with a pained, discordant rhythm. The shepherd tried to hold it, but the piece crumbled at the edges, its light dying. A wave of profound grief washed from the creature, so potent it threatened to pull Lyra into a despair as deep and cold as the mountain stone. Her own mission, her fears for her mentor and her people, felt insignificant next to this being's eternal, lonely vigil over the death of entire worlds of song. To help him, she would have to touch that sorrow without letting it drown her own hope. She remembered the phrase from the stream of echoes, the one that spoke of renewal. It was not a command, but an invitation. She knelt, not reaching for the broken lament, but instead humming the gentle myth, offering its stable, harmonic structure into the space between them. The change was subtle. The discordant fragment stilled its frantic pulsing, as if listening. The shepherd's luminous head tilted. Lyra did not try to fix the song herself. Instead, she provided a framework, a musical anchor around which the shepherd could carefully, lovingly, reweave the scattered notes. As the lament mended, its light softening from a pained white to a gentle gold, the creature's sorrow did not vanish, but it was joined by a fragile thread of gratitude. In a voice that was the echo of 1,000 faded choruses, the shepherd spoke of a hidden route through the shattered peaks, a path known only to the currents of sound and memory. It was a gift, a repayment for a kindness he had not known in ages. Seeing the weight of his endless task, Lyra made a promise. When her quest was done, when the whispers were restored, she would return. She would help him gather the lost songs, for a world that only knew silence could never truly be whole. This alliance was a flicker of light in the vast dark, a profound comfort, yet his very existence was a sobering measure of the devastation they faced. The path he showed her was indeed safer, winding through silent, crystalline tunnels that glowed from within. It eventually opened onto a dizzying ledge. Before them, spanning a chasm that seemed to have no bottom, was a narrow bridge of pure, woven light, humming with the residual magic of the first elven architects. The crystal bridge was a fragile span of pure, solidified intention. It hummed beneath her feet, a single, resonant note that seemed to vibrate through her very soul. This was not a crossing of physical strength, but of spiritual honesty. With each step, the bridge reacted, its light pulsing in time with the rhythm of her heart. Then the visions began to surface, rising from the luminous floor like memories given form. She saw fleeting images of small, forgotten kindnesses, minor oaths left unfulfilled. But one reflection did not fade. It was the memory of a small, wounded forest spirit, a fledgling creature of light she had found as a child. She had promised to protect it, to keep it safe until its wings were strong. But fear of the elders' disapproval had made her hesitate, and in that moment of indecision, the fragile spirit had faded into the air, its light extinguished forever. It was a failure she had buried deep, a private shame that now glowed with accusing clarity on the bridge. The structure groaned, a hairline fracture appearing where she stood. The chasm below was a void of absolute silence, a fall that promised not death, but the permanent loss of all hope and memory. Her deepest fear was not the fall itself, but the truth it revealed, that her own flawed heart could undo everything. The bridge shuddered, its light flickering dangerously. To move forward, she had to move through the shame. She stopped fighting the memory and let it wash over her, feeling the full weight of that long-ago sorrow. She did not make excuses. Instead, she spoke aloud to the vision, her voice steady despite the trembling in her limbs. "I failed you," she whispered into the humming air. "I was afraid, and I was wrong. I accept this." Her vow was not a grand proclamation, but a simple, heartfelt promise to carry the memory forward, to let it guide her hands toward protection and courage from that day on. As the words left her, the fracture in the bridge sealed itself with a sound like a gentle chime. The entire structure flared with a brilliant, steady gold, solidifying into a path of unwavering light. She had passed the trial, but the confrontation had scraped her spirit raw. The chasm's whispers followed her, subtle doubts, asking if one act of atonement could ever truly balance a lifetime of silence. Stepping onto the far ledge, the oppressive silence of the abyss vanished. The air itself grew warm and sweet, carrying the impossible, comforting scent of eternal blossoms, a fragrance that promised a sanctuary untouched by time or sorrow. The air hummed with the static of unborn stories. Before Lyra, the valley of unwritten tales was a landscape of shimmering, half-realized dreams. A castle made of spun sugar, melted and reformed in the corner of her eye. A knight of pure light rode a silent charge against an enemy that was only shadow and mist. These were myths that had never been given voice, concepts that hung in the air, beautiful and heartbreakingly incomplete. They brushed against her mind, each one a whispered question of what could have been. The valley did not attack with thorns or storms, but with something far more seductive, her own deep well of creativity and compassion. It felt like a chorus of silent pleas, begging for the breath of a storyteller to make them whole. One vision in particular wrapped around her, a tale of two starlight beings whose love was so profound, one chose to fade into nothingness so the other could live. Its tragic beauty was a physical ache in her chest, and for a moment, the path of her own quest felt distant and cold. But then, a faint, steady glow pulsed in response to the myth phrase she carried within her, a quiet anchor in the chaotic symphony of potential. The choice was agonizing. To stay would be to give life to countless wonders, to become a weaver of these lost worlds. But it would also be a beautiful prison, a distraction from the singular, urgent song she was meant to sing for her own people. Her heart cracked as she turned her back on the sacrificial lovers, watching their form dissolve back into the shimmering air. She spoke a soft apology to the valley, a promise to the unwritten tales that they were not forgotten, even as she walked away. Her determination, though costly, was rewarded. The faint glow intensified, becoming a clear beacon, pulling her toward the valley's far end. Yet a profound melancholy settled deep within her spirit, the weight of every story left untold, a sorrow she knew she would carry long after this journey was over. The source of the guiding light revealed itself not as an object, but as an opening in the valley wall, a cavern entrance that pulsed with a soft, rhythmic light, like the heartbeat of the world itself. The cavern was a cathedral of living light. All around her, the luminescent weavers moved in a slow, sacred dance, their forms shimmering and indistinct. In their hands, they held threads of pure sound and color, weaving them upon enormous, silent looms into breathtaking tapestries that told the stories of the world's dawn. But the sight was not one of glory, it was one of quiet despair. The great looms were faltering, their rhythmic hums sputtering into uneven silence. The threads in the weaver's hands grew faint, their vibrant hues leaching away into gray. The tapestries themselves, which should have pulsed with eternal life, were growing brittle at the edges, their stories beginning to unravel into nothing. One of the weavers, its form taller and more defined than the others, turned its luminous gaze upon Lyra. There was no anger in its presence, only a sorrow as deep and ancient as the stone around them. Its voice was not a sound, but a resonance felt in the soul, and it spoke of a simple, devastating truth. Their power did not come from themselves alone. It was a cycle, a shared breath between creator and believer. The gentle myths were not just stories to be told. They were living things that required the breath of storytellers and the hearts of listeners to survive. By choosing silence, by abandoning the old songs, the elves had not merely forgotten a tradition. They had broken the cycle of creation itself. The weaver's disappointment was a physical chill in the warm air, a profound sense of betrayal that had lasted for centuries. It was a rift not of malice, but of heartbreak, and Lyra stood on one side of it, a single, small representative of the people who had caused it. How could she possibly bridge such a vast and lonely divide? Her answer was not in words of argument, but in an act of offering. She knelt on the cavern floor, a gesture of humility and respect. Closing her eyes, she reached for the phrase of renewal she had carried from the stream of echoes, the fundamental promise of healing. She did not shout it or command with it. Instead, she began to hum it softly, then to sing, weaving the melody with her own voice, pouring into it all her hope, her regret, and her fierce belief. She directed this fragile song toward the weaver's largest loom, a colossal frame that had stood dark and dormant for generations. For a terrifying moment, nothing happened. Then, a single thread on the great loom flickered, a weak pulse of gold. Another joined it, then another, until the entire structure glowed with a soft, hesitant light. The loom began to hum, a low, steady thrum that vibrated through the cavern floor, a heartbeat returning to a sleeping giant. It was proof. Her worth, her people's potential worth, was demonstrated not by a grand speech, but by a single, sincere song. Yet the rekindled magic was a beacon in the silent world. At the mouth of the cavern, the air itself curdled. A form began to coalesce from the shadows, a shifting, void-like entity that had no shape but absence. This was a silencer, a creature that fed on the death of stories, and it was drawn to the new, vibrant life of the loom. It began to drift into the cavern, its passage sucking the warmth and sound from the air. In response, the luminescent weavers did not flee. They turned as one, their sorrowful demeanor hardening into resolve. From the light of their own beings, they drew forth long, slender needles that glimmered with the cold, sharp light of solidified starlight. The air grew cold as the silencer drifted forward, a moving void that drank the light and sound from the world. Lyra did not hesitate. She stepped forward, placing herself between the advancing emptiness and the fragile, rekindled loom. Drawing a deep breath, she gave voice to the oldest song she knew, a gentle myth of protection passed down from a time when the forests themselves were young. Her voice was a solitary thread at first, but as she sang of roots and stone, of steadfast guardians and unbreakable bonds, the magic of the myth spinners wove around her melody. Together, they spun a barrier of harmonious, golden light that flared between them and the encroaching dark. The silencer recoiled, its formless shape rippling as if struck by a physical blow. For a glorious moment, the song was winning, but the entity did not retreat. Instead, it gathered its own terrible power and released a wave of absolute silence. It was not merely an absence of sound, but an active, nullifying force that pressed against the barrier, seeking to unravel the threads of light and magic at their source. The beautiful song strained, its notes fraying into dissonance under the oppressive weight. Lyra felt the pressure as a physical agony in her throat and chest. Her voice cracked, her breath catching as the nullifying wave threatened to extinguish her song completely. To fail here was to lose everything, not just for her, but for every story waiting to be remembered. She pushed beyond the pain, beyond the limits of her own strength. She reached not into herself, but into the collective memory of her people, drawing upon the deep, abiding love for the forest that had defined them for generations, even in their silence. She channeled that latent devotion, that unspoken connection, into her song. The barrier of light, which had begun to flicker and dim, blazed with a renewed, brilliant intensity, solidifying into a wall of pure, resonant harmony. The silencer was thrown back, its form scattering like smoke in a sudden wind. A tense quiet fell over the cavern, broken only by the steady, strong hum of the great loom. The immediate threat was gone, but the victory was sobering. The head weaver turned its luminous gaze to Lyra, its resonance carrying a grave, new understanding. The entity was not a random predator. It was an antibody, drawn directly to the presence of reawakened magic. Her every success was a beacon, and more would be coming. The weaver then gestured to a newly vibrant tapestry on the wall. It depicted a hidden, windswept summit, cradling a single, dormant star, a place where the final, most fundamental myth of all, the song of creation, could be reignited. The stone beneath their feet refused to hold a single shape. One moment, Lyra's boots scuffed against rough, ancient rock, and the next, it sank into a patch of gravel that felt centuries younger. The sunken peak was not a mountain of mere rock, but a mountain adrift in the river of time itself. Beside her, the weaver alien moved with a fluid grace, his luminous form a steady beacon in the chaotic swirl. He did not speak, but communicated through gentle pulses of light and resonant hums, teaching her to listen not with her ears, but with her entire being. The path forward was a series of rhythmic puzzles, carved into the living stone. A sequence of glowing runes would appear, demanding to be stepped upon in a precise cadence that mirrored the heartbeat of a long-dead age. When Lyra matched her steps to the echo of a past king's coronation march, a jagged ledge solidified from mist, granting them passage. Each successful alignment pulled the entire peak another fraction closer to the present, making their footing more real, more permanent. But the silencers were with them, their pursuit a silent corruption that twisted the mountain's own temporal song. They moved through the shifting slopes like voids, and where they passed, the harmonious echoes of the past would stutter into dissonant gaps. A path Lyra had just solidified would begin to flicker, its existence threatened. The strain was immense. Her mind reeled from the constant temporal shifts, and her body ached with a fatigue that felt both brand new and impossibly ancient. Her instinct was to fight the flow, to force her own rhythm onto the chaos, but she remembered the lesson of the crystal bridge and of the thorns before it. She made a conscious choice to surrender her own tempo. She closed her eyes, trusting Alien's guiding light completely, and focused on feeling the deep, resonant pulse of the mountain itself. She learned to move with its flow, her steps becoming less a march and more a dance with time. This trust was their only shield. When a silencer's nullifying wave washed toward them, threatening to create a temporal rift that would unmake their very history, Lyra did not freeze. She felt Alien's light shift into an urgent, staccato pattern. Together, they stepped into a complex, interlocking rhythm, their movements weaving a protective harmony that countered the spreading silence. The rift sealed with a sound like shattering glass, but the cost was a deep, spiritual exhaustion. Each correct step was a victory, each solved puzzle a reclaiming of lost time, bringing them tantalizingly closer to the windswept summit where the song of creation lay dormant. The air grew thin, the temporal shifts more violent, as if the mountain itself was fighting this final ascent. Then, with one last synchronized step that aligned a final rune with the present moment, they breached the churning cloud cover. The disorienting chaos fell away, replaced by an impossible, profound stillness. The summit stretched before them, bathed in the soft, golden light of a perpetual dawn. The summit was a perfect, silent jewel, cradled in the sky. At its very center, resting upon a pedestal of seamless white stone, floated the first seed. It was not a thing of wood and soil, but a crystalline vessel of pure, captured light, its facets holding the echo of the very first dawn. Yet it was encased in a shell of ice, so clear and so absolute, it seemed to be made of frozen time itself. Alien's form dimmed with a profound sorrow as he gazed upon it. His resonance carried the devastating truth. No spell of power, no desperate plea could crack this shell. It was a lock that could only be opened by a key, forged from the rarest of emotions, a tear of pure, untainted joy. The magic of beginnings required a heart so full of hope and happiness that it overflowed, a feeling uncontaminated by fear or sorrow. Lyra's heart sank. How could she find such a feeling here, at the end of the world, with the weight of her people upon her and the cold presence of their pursuers at her back? Every memory of joy was now tinged with the gray of the blight, or shadowed by the anxiety of her exile. She closed her eyes, blocking out the impossible pressure, and searched for a sanctuary within her own mind. She pushed past the worry, past the fear of failure, and found it, a memory preserved like a perfect flower in amber. It was a sun-drenched afternoon in the Silverwood, before the silence. Her mentor, whole and healthy, was not lecturing or worrying, but was simply laughing, a rich, warm sound that seemed to make the very leaves dance. It was a laugh free from all care, a moment of shared, perfect happiness that existed outside of time. She did not try to force the feeling. She simply let herself live inside that memory once more, feeling its warmth bred through her. And as that perfect, unburdened joy filled her, a single, crystalline tear welled in her eye and traced a path down her cheek. It fell, striking the icy shell with a sound like a tiny bell. Where it landed, the absolute ice did not crack, but simply dissolved, melting away into a soft, shimmering mist. The first seed pulsed, its light swelling from a gentle glow to a radiance that rivaled the sun. The release of power was a wave of pure creation that washed over the summit, so potent it was deafening. But that immense energy was also a beacon, a shout of life in a world trained for silence. From the slopes below, a chorus of answering voids stirred. The very air grew thick and cold as every silencer in the forest turned as one, drawn inexorably toward the source of the light. The seed's glow intensified, its pulse becoming a rhythmic, commanding drumbeat. Then, in a silent, breathtaking cataclysm, a single thread of its light tore free, arcing across the sky like a falling star, its trajectory unwavering as it shot toward the distant, sleeping heart of the Elven Kingdom. A wave of impossible life washed over the world. From her vantage point, Lyra watched the light from the first seed arc across the heavens, and where it touched the forest below, the land breathed anew. Slumbering forest spirits uncurled from roots, their forms shimmering into wakefulness. Blighted areas, once gray and barren, flushed with vibrant green, as if a long illness had finally broken. And the whispers, those fragmented, fearful sounds, wove themselves into clear, melodic songs that rose from the canopy in a harmonious chorus. Far away, in the heart of the Silverwood Glade, Elder Boren stood rigid before the great elder tree. A lifetime of stern conviction shattered on his face as he watched, speechless, the ancient heartwood crack open, not in destruction, but in creation. From its core burst forth blossoms of pure light, their petals drifting on a wind that carried the forgotten scent of eternal spring. For the first time in centuries, the tree was singing. Lyra's heart swelled with a triumph so profound it was almost a pain, but it was instantly tempered by a cold, sobering understanding. This was not a conclusion. The forest's fragile revival was now irrevocably tied to her, a single thread holding back the encroaching dark. The joy of the healed land was a beacon, and it had drawn the attention of its oldest enemy. Around the summit, the air itself began to curdle. The silencers were no longer scattered pursuers, but a unified front, their collective silence merging into a swirling, soundless vortex that advanced up the mountain slope. It was a storm of nothingness, and it began to drink the very light from the air, threatening to swallow the seed's radiance and plunge the world back into quiet. There was no path down the mountain, no time for a slow return. Her people were awakening to a miracle they would not understand, and they needed a guide. She had to go home. Now, as if reading her resolve, Alien moved to her side. His luminous hand found hers, its touch not of flesh, but of solidified starlight and shared purpose. He did not speak of the danger. Instead, he simply stepped forward, pulling her with him not over the cliff's edge, but into the very fabric of the light that pulsed from the seed. For a breathtaking moment, there was no up or down, only the brilliant, singing current of creation, carrying them like a falling star back toward the glade. The world blurred into a river of light and scent, a path of solid blossoms unfurled before their feet, each step landing on petals that shone with their own inner sunrise. The forest itself had become their ally, where a chasm gaped, living vines wove themselves into a swaying bridge. When the way grew steep, gentle wind spirits gathered beneath their arms, carrying them forward on a cushion of air. Their descent was a breathtaking dance with a world reborn, a desperate race toward home. But behind them, a different reality advanced. A wall of absolute silence followed, a creeping edge of gray that withered the vibrant blossoms in its wake, leaving only brittle husks and a chilling quiet. Lyra understood the equation perfectly. Her voice was the only counterweight to that spreading void. She poured every ounce of her will into the myth of renewal, her song, a shimmering thread of harmony that strengthened the path ahead. With every note she sang, the blossoms glowed brighter and the silencers recoiled, their formless edges fraying against the melody. Yet the cost was a deep, draining exhaustion. Each verse felt like drawing breath through water, leaving her lightheaded and her legs trembling with the effort to simply stand. The familiar silver-barked trees of her home rose in the distance, a sight that should have meant safety and respite. But as the path of light carried them to the very border of the Silverwood Glade, it was not a welcome that awaited them. A solid line of elven guards stood shoulder to shoulder, their spears a stark, metallic barrier against the vibrant magic, their faces a mixture of awe, fear, and unwavering suspicion. The spears did not lower, but the guards' hands trembled. Lyra stood before the wall of her own people, her form haloed in the forest's newborn light, her tunic torn and her feet bare upon the soil. She did not plead for entry, she declared it. The gentle myths are no longer stories, she said, her voice clear and resonant. They are the breath of the world, and they remember your names. The proof was a living wave of green, washing through the canopy behind her, a chorus of long-forgotten birdsong, and the undeniable, sweet scent of blossoms that had not bloomed in centuries. The guards were warriors bound by sacred oath, their orders to repel the outcast absolute. Yet how could they deny the vibrant life, healing the land just beyond the boundary stones? Their discipline warred with a deep, ancestral longing they could no longer name. The tension shattered with the arrival of Elder Boren. He pushed through the line, his face a mask of stern authority, but it was a mask beginning to crack. His gaze was not on Lyra, but on a small, private garden just inside the glade, a plot of silver-leafed herbs that had been withering for years. As they watched, the gray leaves flushed with emerald vitality, uncurling toward the sun as if touched by a loving hand. Lyra took a slow, deliberate step forward, her movements peaceful and deliberate. She did not look at Boren, but at the eldest guard, a man whose eyes held the memory of a less fearful time. From the path of solid light at her feet, she plucked a single, luminous blossom. She offered it to him, not as a weapon, but as a gift. His armored fingers, trained for war, closed around the fragile stem. The moment the petals touched his skin, their fragrance intensified, blooming into an aroma that was more than a scent. It was the warmth of a childhood hearth, the comfort of a lullaby half remembered, the quiet peace of a forest untroubled by shadow. A wave of calm washed through the assembled elves. Skeptical murmurs faded into a collective, awed silence as the fragrance worked its gentle magic, stirring memories buried deep beneath generations of caution. As the crowd instinctively parted, Lyra's gaze finally met Boren's. She saw no trace of the cold anger she had faced in the council chamber. Instead, she saw a profound and ancient grief laid bare, the sorrow of a man who had sacrificed joy for safety, only to watch that safety turn into a cage. The council chamber felt different this time. The air, once thick with judgment, now held the scent of the luminous blossom Lyra had brought, and the ancient stones seemed to listen. Elder Boren did not stand before her from his high seat. He descended to the floor, his shoulders bowed not by authority, but by a weight he had carried for decades. In the hushed silence, he confessed. As a young man, driven by the same desperate hope as Lyra, he had once whispered to the Heartwood, but his voice had been laced with fear and demand, not with the selfless offering of a story song. The forest had not answered with guidance. Instead, a single, radiant myth spinner, drawn by his flawed call, had been seized by the encroaching silence and extinguished before his eyes. His life's work, the rigid laws of quiet and isolation, were not born of wisdom, but from the crushing guilt of that single, catastrophic failure. The other elders stared, their rigid world, fracturing. The foundation of their entire society was not built on strength, but on the scar tissue of one man's trauma. Lyra felt a hot surge of anger. His fear had exiled her, had forced her people into a prison of quiet, all to prevent anyone from repeating his mistake. But as she looked at the profound grief etched into his face, the anger cooled into a painful, dawning empathy. He had not acted from malice, but from a broken heart's misguided attempt at protection. Her own journey had been paved with second chances from the forest. How could she now deny one to him? She stepped forward, her voice clear and calm in the stunned chamber. I forgive you, Elder Boren. The gentle myths do not speak of perfection. They teach us of cycles, of the long journey from error to redemption. This is the myth we must live now. Her words were not just an absolution for him, but a new law for them all. The act of grace was a different kind of magic, weaving through the council and binding them with a purpose more potent than fear. But that hard-won unity was fragile. As the elders looked to one another, their resolve finally aligning, the warm light filtering through the chamber's crystalline windows began to dim. An unnatural twilight fell, not from clouds, but from a void that drank the sun itself. At the forest's edge, the collective silence of the silencer horde pressed against the Glade's rejuvenated magical barriers, a wall of nothingness seeking to smother their newborn light. A single voice could not hold back the coming dark. Lyra turned from the council and faced her people, their faces a mixture of hope and deep-seated fear. She did not ask for warriors. She asked for singers. The simple phrase of renewal, the one she had carried from the stream of echoes, was their only tool. She taught it to them not as a complex spell, but as a gentle hum, a foundational note their ancestors had known in their bones. At first, the sound was hesitant, a collection of weak, trembling threads. Many had not used their voices for anything but quiet speech in their entire lives. But as Lyra moved among them, she did not stand before them to conduct. She went to an elderly woman whose voice wavered and hummed with her, sharing her breath. She knelt beside a child, guiding the note until it grew clear and strong. She was not a commander of a choir, but a weaver of confidence, strengthening each thread until the whole could hold, and it did. Their combined voices began to weave a visible shield above the glade, a dome of shimmering, harmonic energy that pulsed with soft gold and green light. When the wall of silence crashed against it, the shield held, but it flickered violently, like a candle in a gale. The elves flinched, their song stuttering as they felt the immense, nullifying pressure of the silencer's collective will. It was a battle not of strength, but of spirit, and their spirit was still so fragile. Just as they found a shaky rhythm, the nature of the assault changed. The formless entities, recognizing the unified source of the elves' power, converged their energy into a single, devastating point. They turned their full, silent wrath upon the great elder tree at the Glade's heart. The ancient tree, which had only just begun to bloom with light, shuddered. Its radiant blossoms dimmed, and a crackle of dissonant energy shot through its bark. Alien's hand was on Lyra's shoulder in an instant, his luminous form pointing urgently toward the suffering heartwood. The connection was breaking. If the tree fell back into silence, the fledgling magic of every elf would break with it. Lyra's gaze met the weaver's, and in that silent exchange, she understood the final, terrible step of the journey. Her place was no longer here, strengthening the chorus. Her place was there, at the root of the silence, to sing for the heart of the forest itself. The path to the great elder tree was a tunnel of focused sound. Lyra did not run from the chorus, but through it, her steps guided by the shimmering dome of their collective song. She reached the ancient heartwood, its bark once again trembling under the focused assault of the void. There was no time for ceremony. She pressed her forehead against the rough, living bark, closing her eyes. Her offer was a silent, desperate prayer. Let me be your vessel. Take their song and let it flow through me. The tree's acceptance was instantaneous and overwhelming. It was not a gentle flow, but a cataclysm. The entire harmonic power of the elven choir, a force meant for 1,000 voices, flooded into her single being. Her nerves screamed as if filled with lightning. Her mind, a quiet glade of personal thoughts, was suddenly a roaring stadium of a civilization's reawakened hope and fear. The pressure built behind her eyes, a tectonic force threatening to crack her consciousness into a million glittering shards. To lose focus for even a second was to let the song collapse into a destructive scream. She clung to one image, a single, perfect memory of the forest as it was meant to be. Every leaf a note, every breeze a verse in an eternal, gentle myth. She wrapped the agony around that vision and held on, her body rigid, a living nexus of unbearable power. Below, the silencers clawed at the tree's roots, their formless tendrils of silence digging into the soil, seeking to sever the connection. But the song flowing through Lyra was a torrent now, a purified current of creation that would not be denied. It reached a critical mass within the heartwood. With a sound that was less a noise and more the birth of a new world, the great elder tree erupted. A silent nova of pure, white light and resonant harmony exploded outward, a wave of absolute life. The nearest silencers, those void entities that fed on silence, were unmade by the very thing they sought to destroy, vaporized into motes of harmless, fading shadow. As the brilliant wave washed over the glade and faded into the distant woods, the last echo of the song died away. Lyra's body went limp, sliding down the base of the tree. Her own voice was utterly spent, a hollow, silent thing. She lay still upon the roots, as fragile as a dropped leaf. A profound silence fell over the Silverwood, but this quiet was different. It was not the dead, fearful silence of the blight, but a deep, resonant peace, filled with the gentle, grateful rustle of 1,000 newborn leaves. The first thing she felt was the softness of moss beneath her fingertips and the gentle warmth of dawn on her face. Lyra's eyes fluttered open to a circle of faces, her entire elven community gazing down at her with expressions of awe and profound relief. Standing closest was Alien, the myth spinner, his luminous form no longer a shimmering suggestion, but a defined, solid presence, woven from light and living wood. Beyond them, the great elder tree was no longer just a tree. It had become a fountain, its trunk and branches pulsing with a soft, internal light, while a complex, beautiful music flowed from its core, a melody that wove seamlessly with the audible hum of the whispering forest itself, a harmony that now stretched for leagues in every direction. The world was saved, its song restored, but as Lyra tried to push herself up, a deep, draining weakness held her down. A cold dread seeped into her heart. She looked from face to face, her own filling with a silent, desperate question. She tried to form words, to ask if it was truly over, if the forest was whole. All that escaped her lips was a soft, voiceless breath. The community's future was secure, a vibrant tapestry of sound and light, but her own personal fate seemed to be a terrible, quiet echo. Her greatest fear, the one that had haunted her since the moment the tree's power had flooded through her, was now a reality. She had given her own song to save the forests. She could witness the beautiful myths, but she could no longer sing them. She could see the harmony, but she was forever separate from it, a silent note in a world of music. As this devastating truth settled upon her, Alien knelt, his starlight hand, warm and solid, gently pressed against her throat. There was no flash of light, no grand spell. Just a subtle transfer of energy, a gentle tuning of something that had been strained to its limit. Lyra felt a faint vibration, a stirring in the silence within her. She took a hesitant breath, and from her lips came a single, clear note. It was weak, and it trembled in the air, but it was unmistakably a sound, a tone of pure, perfect music. The air hummed with a reverence that was both ancient and brand new. All of Silverwood Glade had gathered in the wide clearing around the great elder tree, their faces turned upward not in fear, but in rapt attention. The luminescent weavers stood among them, their forms no longer indistinct, but clear and solid, their presence a quiet promise. This was the first weaving ceremony in centuries, and the honor of speaking the opening line, of founding the first new gentle myth of this age, fell to Lyra. The weight of that responsibility pressed down on her, a pressure far greater than any silencer's assault. Every word had to be perfect, a flawless jewel to anchor their new beginning. She looked out at the expectant faces, at Elder Boren's quiet, supportive gaze, and felt the old fear of inadequacy stir. But then she remembered the crystal bridge and the cost of pretending to be anything but what she was. Perfection was not the goal, truth was. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the memory of their difficult journey wash over her, The sting of exile, the terror of the thorns, the profound sorrow of the shepherd, and the hard-won forgiveness in the council chamber. She would not speak only of victory, she would speak of the whole journey. Her voice, when it came, was clear and steady, but it carried the soft edges of remembered hardship. She began not with a grand declaration, but with a simple, human admission. We were afraid, and from that honest starting point, she wove the tale. She spoke of a community that had chosen silence over risk, and of one small voice that refused to be quiet. She spoke of a mentor's love that fueled a desperate hope, and of the cold loneliness of walking a path no one else could see. As she narrated their story, the weavers began their work. Looms of light appeared in the air, and threads of shimmering color, spun from the very emotion in her words, flew from their hands. A scene of the council's judgment formed in the tapestry, the threads not just showing stern faces, but carrying the chill of that moment. The stream of echoes swirled into being, its threads humming with 1,000 layered memories. The shepherd of lost songs appeared, his form woven from threads of profound melancholy, but also from the new, golden thread of the Lament Lyra had helped him mend. She did not shy away from her own failures, the small, wounded spirit from the bridge, or the moments of doubt that had nearly broken her. With each truth spoken, the tapestry grew more vibrant, more real. It was not a sanitized legend of heroes, but a living chronicle of flawed beings who had chosen courage over and over again. As she spoke the final words, a simple phrase about unity, forged in shared vulnerability, the last thread was placed. The completed tapestry glowed with an intense, warm light. Then, it detached from the looms and floated gently toward the great elder tree. Upon contact with the ancient bark, it did not hang there like a decoration. It melted into the wood, its colors and story flowing into the tree's pulsing veins. A new, distinct melody joined the forest's eternal song, a harmonious strain that told their specific story of fear, exile, and return. The myth was no longer just a story they told. It was now a permanent part of the world's magic, a testament that would strengthen the bond between elf and myth for all time. And as that new song settled into the air, the forest itself seemed to listen, understanding its own history a little better. The stillness of the new era was broken by the council's summons, but the chamber Lyra entered was unrecognizable from the one she had faced in exile. The high seats were gone, replaced by a simple circle where elders and newly appointed storytellers sat together. Elder Boren's voice, once sharp with frost, was now tempered with a quiet humility as he spoke not of laws, but of a need. He offered her the newly forged title of Keeper of the Grove, the first of its kind, a guardian for the gentle myths, and a living bridge to the myth spinners. The honor was immense, a validation of her entire journey, yet a cold knot tightened in her stomach. To accept was to step into a role of immense power, to shape the very soul of her people. She looked at the hopeful faces around her and saw the dangerous potential for this new order to calcify into another unyielding institution, its rules as stifling as the silence they had just escaped. Her decision to accept was not made lightly. With the title, she established a single, foundational rule for all future keepers. Each must periodically lay down their authority and journey into the whispering forest alone, with nothing but their own voice and the clothes on their back, to remember the vulnerability of a seeker and the perspective of an outcast. This act of intentional humility would, she hoped, be an eternal vaccine against the rigid pride that had nearly destroyed them. Her leadership instantly solidified a new cultural identity for the elves, one woven from song and story, but it also elevated her into something more than a person. She became the symbolic heart of their reborn world, a figure of immense influence whose safety was now inextricably linked to the stability of their entire civilization. Any future threat to their harmony would find its clearest target in her. As the first official keeper of the grove, her initial duty was a quiet one. She walked to the edge of the glade, where the familiar, sorrowful hum of the shepherd of lost songs resonated through the twilight. He waited for her, his satchel of fading melodies glowing softly, ready to begin the long, patient work of recovery together. Their journey was a quiet pilgrimage through a world still remembering how to sing. Lyra walked beside the shepherd of lost songs, their path illuminated by the soft glow of his satchel, a collection of fading lights that yearned to be whole again. Each recovered fragment was not a simple trophy to be collected, but a delicate surgery upon the soul of the forest itself. When they found a splinter of a lullaby trapped in the gnarled roots of a petrified oak, Lyra did not simply hum the tune to free it. She sat for hours, her hand resting on the rough bark, listening to the tree's own silent memory of the sapling it had once been, and the nest of songbirds that had sheltered in its branches. Only when she understood the context of that specific, gentle protection did she sing the lullaby back into the air. The result was instantaneous. The petrified wood softened, its gray bark flushing with a vibrant, healthy brown, and from a high branch, a new generation of fledgling wind spirits took their first wobbly flight, their tiny forms humming with the very melody she had restored. With every myth they recovered, the forest's magic deepened. A blighted marsh, once a stagnant pool of sorrow, cleared into a crystalline spring after they soothed a fragment of a rain-summoning chant that had been twisted by grief. The air itself grew thicker with possibility, the light under the canopy warmer, the very soil more alive underfoot. Yet some fragments were guarded not by physical barriers, but by emotional ones. They encountered a fierce, territorial fox spirit who jealously hoarded a shard of a hunting myth, believing its power was the only thing keeping its family safe from a long-vanished threat. Lyra did not challenge the creature. Instead, she spent a day and a night sitting at the edge of its territory, sharing stories of her own fears and failures, until the fox spirit understood that true strength lay not in isolation, but in a shared, harmonious world. It was this patient, respectful approach that defined her new role. She was not a conqueror reclaiming lost property, but a mediator healing old wounds. The forest was becoming richer and more resilient with every act of understanding, but the process was also exposing profound, ancient scars that could not be rushed. Their next clue was a faint, keening melody carried on the high winds, a sound of such deep, lonely sorrow that it had scoured the face of a granite cliff for centuries. The shepherd's satchel pulsed with a sympathetic ache, drawing them upward toward the source of this powerful, trapped lament. The Howling Cleft was not a place, but a wound in the sky. Lyra's fingers bled as she scaled the sheer granite face, each gust from the chasm above feeling less like wind and more like a scream given physical form. It was the lament of the wind, a myth of such profound sorrow that its endless, cyclical retelling had eroded the stone and festered into a perpetual, shrieking storm. To simply pluck this song from the air was impossible. Its pain was a fortress, and the only key was to listen, to let the entire, heartbreaking story pour into her until she understood its source. The tale unfolded not in words, but in raw emotion and fleeting images. It was the story of a celestial wind spirit and a mortal starlight weaver, a love that defied the boundaries of their worlds. They had shared a promise to meet with every new moon, but a great celestial event had pulled the weaver into a different part of the sky, a separation that lasted for an age. The wind, believing its love was forsaken, had circled this cliff for centuries, its gentle calls of devotion slowly sharpening into this shrieking cry of betrayal. The sorrow was a living entity, and as Lyra absorbed it, she felt the edges of her own hope begin to fray. A crushing despair whispered that all promises were fragile, that all connections were destined to be severed by time or misunderstanding. She had to anchor herself to the memory of Alien's steadfast presence and the unified song of her people to keep from being swept away by the grief. She realized the myth was trapped not by the event itself, but by its unresolved ending. The story had no closure, only an eternal, agonizing question. Lyra knew she could not change the past, but she could offer the story a different kind of peace. Closing her eyes against the buffeting gale, she began to weave a new ending. She sang of the starlight weaver, not as faithless, but as forever gazing down from the night sky, sending silent apologies on every shooting star. She sang of the wind's love not as a wasted effort, but as a force so powerful it had shaped the very landscape into a monument to its memory. She offered the myth a resolution of peaceful release, where the love was not lost, but transformed into the gentle pressure of a breeze and the distant, comforting twinkle of a star. As her new verse wove into the old, the shrieking tempest faltered. The violent gusts softened, the scream melting into a sigh, and then into a gentle, melodic breeze that hummed the completed, bittersweet tale. The emotional toll, however, was immense. Lyra slumped against the rock, weary to her very soul, the profound sadness of the ages, a lingering chill in her heart. She had healed the land, but she carried its scars. The new, gentle breeze swirled around her, cool and cleansing, and it carried with it the unmistakable, promising scent of rain, guiding their gaze toward a distant, parched valley that had been waiting for that very smell for a lifetime. The cracked earth of the valley floor was a mosaic of deep, thirsty fissures. Here, the myth of rain had not been forgotten, but violently shattered. Scattered across the desolate landscape were the fragments, heavy stones carved with runes that once formed a perfect, harmonious circle. Each stone felt cold and inert, its carving a silent plea for a connection it could no longer make. The task was not one of song, but a physical reconstruction, a desperate puzzle where the penalty for a single misaligned angle was not mere failure, but a cataclysm. A misplaced stone could twist the gentle call for rain into a destructive torrent, washing the barren soil away for good, or worse, locking the drought into an unbreakable curse for another 1,000 years. The pressure was a physical weight, as heavy as the granite slabs they had to move. Lyra closed her eyes, letting the cacophony of the howling cleft fade, and reached for a different memory. She immersed herself in the feeling of the stream of echoes, not its chaotic memories, but the fundamental desire of the water itself, its deep, instinctual yearning to fall, to flow, to nourish. Her hands, resting on the first stone, were no longer just her own. They became vessels for that ancient, liquid longing. Guided by this profound empathy, she and the shepherd began their work. He would hum the resonant frequency of a rune, and she would feel for the answering pull in the earth, the subtle magnetic draw of one stone to its intended neighbor. Slowly, painstakingly, the circle began to reform. With each correctly placed stone, the air changed. The oppressive dryness gave way to a palpable humidity. High above, the flawless blue sky began to bruise with the first gathering clouds, a sight no living creature in this valley had ever witnessed. A collective, silent hope seemed to rise from the dust itself. Then it came, a single, fat drop of water that struck a rune-carved stone with a sound like a tiny bell. It was followed by another and another, a soft, pattering rhythm that was the most beautiful music Lyra had ever heard. Where the drops landed, tiny sparks of latent magic ignited, and shriveled seeds buried for generations suddenly swelled, their green tips pushing up through the hardened soil. But the sound of falling water, a forgotten melody in this silent realm, also stirred something else. From a cavern in the valley wall, a low, grinding rumble answered the rain. A massive form unfolded itself from the darkness, a creature woven from the very granite of the parched mountains. Its body was a jagged landscape of crystalline spines, and in its core glowed a dull, possessive light. This stone beast had slept for eons, believing all moisture belonged to it alone, and it now viewed the blessed rain as a theft. It lumbered onto the valley floor, its crystalline body reflecting the flashes of the newly breaking storm, each facet gleaming with a territorial fury. The stone beast's voice was not a sound, but a grinding vibration that resonated deep in Lyra's bones. It did not advance to attack, but stood as a living barricade between the newly falling rain and the valley it had claimed. Its question was a challenge more formidable than any physical blow. Why should the water return to a place your kind abandoned? Why does a silent people deserve the gift of a forgotten song? The fate of the entire valley hung on her answer, and she knew that no spell, no matter how powerful, could compel this ancient guardian. She had to speak a truth so fundamental, it could mend a rift centuries wide. She thought of her exile, of the shepherd's endless grief, of the council's fear-hardened hearts. She did not speak of blame or of entitlement. Instead, she spoke of the water's own longing, a desire to complete its cycle and nourish the waiting soil. She spoke of the elves' difficult journey back from silence, a path of humility and earned forgiveness. Our responsibility was not to command the world, but to listen to its needs, she said, her voice clear and steady against the soft rhythm of the rain. And in listening, we remember that our own breath is part of its larger song. The stone beast was utterly still, its crystalline facets reflecting the gathering storm. Then a deep, resonant hum began within its core, a sound of profound and ancient recognition. The rigid, possessive light at its heart softened, melting from a dull red into a brilliant, flowing blue. With a sound like a mountain sighing in relief, the creature's form shifted, its jagged spines smoothed into graceful, arching curves, and the water it had hoarded for ages began to flow from within, cascading down its new shape in a beautiful, perpetual fountain. The first true spring of the renewed valley was born not from the ground, but from a transformed heart. As the life-giving rain continued to fall, soaking into the grateful earth, Lyra looked up. A rainbow arched across the sky, its colors so intensely vibrant, they seemed to pulse with a light of their own. One end of the brilliant arc touched the newly flowing fountain, while the other reached unmistakably toward the distant, shimmering heart of the Elven Kingdom, a silent, luminous path laid out just for her. The air in Silverwood Glade was thick with the sound of 1,000 quiet voices. Lyra returned to find the first festival of whispers already unfolding, a living tapestry of shared secrets and small, personal tales. Elves of all ages stood beside trees, knelt by streams, or simply faced the open air, offering their own simple stories to the listening world. With every shared memory, every small confession of joy or fear, the forest answered. Patches of moss would glow with a soft, blue luminescence. A chorus of birds from different parts of the canopy would call out in perfect, harmonic sequence. It was magic, but it was an intimate magic, born from individual courage and not from grand, ancient spells. Lyra watched the community she had saved, now thriving in a way she had never seen, and a cold knot of isolation tightened in her chest. They had learned the lesson so completely, they no longer needed a teacher. What was a keeper in a world that kept its own stories? For a long moment, she stood at the edge of the celebration, a silent figure in the vibrant crowd, wondering if her greatest success had made her purpose obsolete. Then she made a choice. She would not step forward as a leader or a symbol. She would join the circle as just another voice. She found a quiet spot near the great elder tree, closed her eyes, and began to speak. The story she chose was not one of epic quests or terrifying foes. It was a simple, sun-drenched memory from her earliest childhood, a tale of trying to count the spots on a ladybug's back and getting hopelessly lost in the wonder of it. As she spoke of that tiny, perfect moment of discovery, her voice was just one thread among many, unremarkable and true. And in that humble act of sharing a simple joy, she demonstrated the most profound truth of all, that the power of myths was not a relic to be guarded by a chosen few, but a living gift belonging to every willing heart. As her last word faded, a single, perfectly formed leaf detached from the highest branch of the elder tree. It spiraled down through the air, a slow, deliberate dance of gold and green, and landed directly in her open palm. The leaf pulsed with a soft, warm light, a gentle, reassuring rhythm that echoed the steady beat of her own heart. The cloak settled on her shoulders with the weight of a soft shadow and the warmth of a remembered constellation. Alien and the gathered myth spinners had woven it from captured twilight and the laughter of newborn stars, a garment that shimmered with a quiet, internal light. It was their formal gift, a profound acknowledgement of her role as keeper. As the fabric touched her, a cascade of new sensations flooded her senses. The rustle of leaves was no longer just a sound, but a clear, distinct language discussing the day's warmth. The murmur of the nearby stream formed into complete sentences about the stones it had polished smooth over the centuries. She could understand the cheerful gossip of the sparrows and the slow, patient thoughts of the lichen on the rocks. It was the ultimate tool for her duty, the ability to understand the language of every living thing in the forest. Yet instead of elation, a cold dread coiled in her stomach. This was not just honor, it was a chain. The expectations woven into this fabric were heavier than the threads themselves. To be given such a power meant she could never again claim not to hear the forest's needs, its pains, or its disappointments. Her every decision would now be made with the clarity of 1,000 simultaneous voices in her mind. She closed her eyes, the beautiful noise of the world almost too much to bear, and made a silent, fervent vow. She would never use this gift to command or to impose her will. Its sole purpose would be for deeper, more humble listening, a way to truly understand the myriad voices she was sworn to serve. In accepting the cloak, she was not just accepting a tool, she was accepting a permanent bond. Her life was now irrevocably tied to the myth spinners, a bridge between the mortal and the magical, a connection that would last for all time. The first clear voice that rose above the new chorus was a familiar one, a resonant hum that vibrated up from the soil and through the soles of her feet. It was the great elder tree. "Welcome, little sister," it whispered into her mind, its tone as ancient and kind as the bedrock. "Now that you can truly hear, will you stay and listen to the forest dreaming?" The dream was not a sleep, but a deeper kind of waking. Sitting beneath the great elder tree, with the star-woven cloak around her, Lyra opened her mind, and the forest poured in. It was a tapestry woven from a billion threads of consciousness, a symphony where the hopeful sprout of a seedling was a clear, high note, and the ancient, patient memory of a granite cliff was a deep, resonant hum. She felt the gentle fear of a rabbit kit venturing from its burrow, the quiet satisfaction of a root finding water, and the collective sun-warmed joy of a meadow of wildflowers. The scale of it was immense, a vast ocean of being that threatened to dissolve her own sense of self into its endless currents. To listen was to risk drowning. Her instinct was to reach out, to soothe a fear or encourage a hope, to guide the dream like a conductor. But she remembered her vow, the purpose of the cloak. She made a conscious, difficult choice to simply be a vessel, to let the sensations flow through her without judgment or interference. She learned to focus on a single thread at a time, to follow the intricate melody of one creature's life, without being swept away by the overwhelming chorus of the whole. This deep, empathic connection made her the ultimate guardian of the forest spirit, a living anchor for its collective soul, but the price was a constant, raw vulnerability. A blight on a single leaf was a pinprick of pain in her own skin. The loss of a fledgling bird was a genuine, fleeting sorrow in her heart. She felt every joy and every hardship with an intimacy that was both a privilege and a profound burden. Yet within this swirling tapestry of shared existence, a new sensation bloomed. It was a tiny, bright spark of pure potential, a glimmer of a story not yet fully formed, born from the shared experiences near the Glade's edge. And within the shared dream, Lyra smiled. The spark in the dream was a melody of pure possibility, and Lyra followed its thread through the forest's shared consciousness until she found its source. A young elf child sat cross-legged before a slender sapling, speaking in a voice soft with concentration. The story was a simple one, about a moss fairy who bravely guarded a dewdrop from the morning sun. The words were not polished, and the tale meandered like a happy stream, but the child's belief was absolute. As the final sentence was spoken, the air around the sapling shimmered. A tiny form, woven from living moss and morning light, winked into existence, its delicate wings humming as it hovered near a leaf. The power of creation had not just returned to the land, it had taken root in a new generation. A deep, instinctual urge rose within Lyra, the keeper's impulse to guide, to perhaps suggest a more elegant turn of phrase or a mythically accurate detail. But she pressed her lips together, holding the advice inside. To intervene would be to impose an old standard on a new voice, to risk shaping this raw, heartfelt magic into just another echo of the past. Her role was not to curate perfection, but to protect the fragile space where such imperfect wonders could be born. She settled quietly onto the moss a short distance away, her presence a silent, supportive anchor, allowing the young myth maker the freedom to flourish without an audience of expectation. The child, finally noticing her, offered a shy smile before turning back to the sapling, already beginning another tale. This small, unscripted moment was the final proof Lyra needed. The cycle was not just restored, it was self-sustaining. The gentle myths were no longer a lost treasure to be recovered, but a living, breathing tradition being rewritten with every whispered story. The future of the forest was secure in the hands of its children. As the first story concluded, the newborn moss fairy, drawn by the steady light of the star cloak, flew upward on wings that chimed like tiny bells and landed gently on Lyra's offered finger. The symphony of the forest was no longer something she heard, but something she was. Lyra stood at the heart of the Silverwood Glade, the star-woven cloak a second skin, her senses woven into the very fabric of the world's new song. The unified voices of her people rose in a gentle hum, intertwining with the complex, luminous weavings of the myth spinners and the ancient, resonant melody of the great elder tree. It was a convergence of sound and spirit, so complete it felt like the first true breath of a new age, and in that breathtaking moment, a final, quiet truth settled deep within her. Her entire arduous journey, from a desperate whisper to this glorious chorus, had never been about returning to a forgotten golden age. It was about building something new, a future where harmony was not a rigid, perfect structure, but a living, breathing collaboration. It was a world where the smallest voice, the most personal story, held the inherent power to contribute to the whole. She did not step forward to conduct this magnificent orchestra. She did not raise her arms to cast a final, sealing spell. The grand feat was over. What remained was the simple, profound act of participation. Closing her eyes, she drew a soft breath and added her own note to the eternal symphony. It was not a shout of triumph or a complex melody. It was a quiet, steady tone, the same humble note that had first escaped her lips when her voice was restored, now offered with the full weight of her hard-won wisdom and her quiet, unshakable love. And in that offering, something shifted. The immense, beautiful chorus did not grow louder. Instead, it found its perfect, final balance. The music achieved a resonance so pure it seemed to stop time itself, a harmony that vibrated in the air, in the soil, and in the soul of every living thing. The last, lingering echo of the old silence, the faint, cold whisper of separation that had clung to her own heart since the moment of her sacrifice, simply dissolved. It was not washed away by power, but warmed into wholeness by belonging. She was not a solitary keeper guarding a fragile flame. She was a single, essential note in a song that would now last forever. The whispering forest thrives now not as a relic, but as a living chronicle. Its gentle myths are woven into the daily rhythm of the elves, shared over meals and hummed while tending to the groves, as natural as breathing. Lyra moves among her people not as a distant ruler, but as a humble keeper, a guide who listens far more than she commands. She understands that her greatest strength lies not in holding power, but in empowering others to find their own voices within the grand symphony. The Old Elven Kingdoms are not rebuilt to their former, isolated glory, for that was a perfection built on fear. Instead, they have evolved into something far more resilient, a society deeply interconnected with the forest and its ancient magic, finding their strength in vulnerability and their unity in shared stories. Lyra's personal journey is complete, a transformation from a desperate rule breaker into a quiet wisdom keeper. The profound sacrifice she made, the fear of losing her own song, has blossomed into a legacy that belongs to everyone. The forest continues to whisper, but its tales are no longer just of ancient wonders or forgotten sorrows. They are stories of unity, forged in hardship, of renewal born from forgiveness, and of the quiet, enduring truth that a single voice, offered with courage and compassion, can truly change the world. And in that truth, the future stretches out, rich and luminous, holding the infinite promise of endless new myths yet to be born.